Someone says one sentence to you, perhaps 6 words, perhaps even fewer, and within a fraction of a second, your whole body has changed. Your jaw tightens, your breathing shortens, a heat rises in your chest, and a voice in your head has already begun constructing a defense or an attack or both. 6 words, and you are no longer here. You are somewhere else entirely, in a story, in an old wound, in a battle that, in a sense, has been fought many times before, long before this particular person said this particular thing to you. Does this sound familiar? This is what I want to look at with you today, this almost instantaneous movement from stimulus to reaction, and how it is possible, not through suppression, not through gritted teeth self-control, but through a deeper kind of awareness, to interrupt this ancient pattern and respond instead of react. This is one of the most practical and most transformative things a human being can learn, because it touches every relationship, every conflict, every moment of friction in your life. Let us start by looking honestly at what a trigger actually is. A trigger is not really about the present moment, even though it feels entirely about the present moment. When someone says something and you feel an intense reaction rise up, disproportionate, perhaps, to the actual content of what was said. What is being activated is not simply a response to those words, it is the activation of something older, something already present in you, waiting, in a sense, for a matching signal. I call this accumulated structure the pain body, an energetic residue of old, unprocessed emotional pain, carried in the body and the unconscious mind, built up over years, sometimes from childhood, sometimes from more recent wounds that were never fully felt and released. The pain body lies mostly dormant, but certain situations, certain tones of voice, certain kinds of criticism, certain feelings of being dismissed or controlled or abandoned, these can awaken it instantly, and once awake, it takes over. It becomes, for a period of time, the one running the show, using your voice, your face, your body to express itself, often in ways you regret only minutes later. This is why, if you look honestly at your most intense reactions, you often find they are wildly out of proportion to the actual event that triggered them. A partner forgets to do something small, and suddenly there is a fight that seems to be about far more than the small thing. Old grievances resurface, past patterns repeat, and within minutes, two people who love each other are speaking to one another as though they were enemies. This is the pain body in action, feeding on the drama, on the friction, because, and this is important to understand, the pain body does not want peace. It wants to be fed. It sustains itself through negative emotion, through conflict, through the repetition of old suffering. It is almost, if we can speak of it this way, addicted to unhappiness, because unhappiness is the very substance it is made of. Now, I'm not telling you this to make you feel powerless against it, as though you are simply a puppet of old pain with no way out. Quite the opposite. Understanding this mechanism is the first and most crucial step toward freedom from it. Because once you see clearly that your intense reaction is not simply you responding rationally and appropriately to what is happening now, but rather an old pattern being triggered and taking control, something remarkable becomes possible. The possibility of awareness arising in the very midst of the reaction, creating a small gap, a moment of choice, where before there was only automatic response. Let us look now at the difference between reacting and responding, because this distinction is at the very heart of what I want to offer you. Reacting is unconscious. It is instantaneous, automatic, and it comes from identification, complete identification with the thought and emotion that has arisen, so complete that there is no separation between you and the reaction. In this state, you do not experience yourself as having anger. You simply are anger, fully, without remainder. There is no witness present, only the reaction itself, moving through you and often out through your words and actions before you have had any chance to examine it. This is why people so often say afterward, I don't know what came over me, or I wasn't myself. In a sense, this is exactly right. You were not, in that moment, present as your true self. You were entirely taken over by the pain body, by old conditioning, by ego defending itself. Responding, on the other hand, requires a gap, however small, between the stimulus and the action that follows it. In this gap, awareness is present. There is a witness, a quality of presence that can observe the rising emotion, the rising thought, without being completely consumed by it. This does not mean you don't feel the emotion. You may feel intense anger, intense hurt, intense fear, but there is a part of you, however subtle at first, that is aware of feeling this rather than being lost inside it without remainder. This awareness is what allows for choice. And where there is choice, there is freedom, freedom to speak from a wiser place, freedom to remain silent when silence serves better than words, freedom to set a boundary without cruelty, freedom to walk away rather than escalate. So how, practically, do you create this gap? How do you move from a lifetime of automatic reaction toward the capacity to respond with presence? The first and most essential practice is this. Notice the moment the reaction begins to arise, as early as possible. Most people only notice their reaction long after it has already taken over, sometimes minutes later, sometimes hours later, sometimes only when someone else points out how they behaved. The practice is to catch it earlier and earlier, ideally at the very first stirring, the first tightening in the chest, the first heat rising in the face, the first thought beginning to form its defensive or aggressive shape. In that very first moment, before the reaction has fully taken hold, awareness has its greatest opportunity to intervene. How do you train this? Through the simple, repeated practice of body awareness. Throughout your day, not just in moments of conflict, practice feeling the aliveness inside your body, the subtle energy field that animates your hands, your arms, your torso. This is not a complicated technique. Simply, periodically bring attention into the body and feel it from within without needing to label anything. This practice, done consistently, strengthens your capacity to notice quickly when something shifts, when the body begins to contract, when tension begins to rise. It is this same body awareness that will alert you in the moment of a trigger that something old is stirring, before the mind has even fully constructed its story about why. Once you notice the reaction beginning to rise, the next practice is this. Pause. This sounds almost too simple to mention, and yet it is one of the most powerful tools available to you. The pause interrupts the automatic chain reaction. It does not require you to suppress the feeling. Suppression only pushes the pain body's energy underground, where it will resurface later, perhaps even more intensely. Instead, the pause simply creates space. You might take one conscious breath. You might, if the situation allows, say to the other person, "I need a moment before I respond." You might simply feel your feet on the ground, feel the weight of your body, feel the air moving in and out of your lungs. This pause is not avoidance. It is not weakness. It is, in fact, one of the most powerful acts of presence available to a human being, because it interrupts thousands of years of conditioned, automatic, ego-driven reaction. In this pause, something else becomes possible. You can ask yourself gently, without judgment, what is happening in me right now? Not what is wrong with the other person, not how do I win this, but simply, honestly, what is happening in me. You may notice fear underneath the anger. You may notice old hurt underneath the defensiveness. You may notice a story running, "They always do this. This proves I don't matter. I have to protect myself now." Simply noticing this story without believing it completely, without acting from it immediately, begins to loosen its grip. The story may still be partially true. Sometimes there is a legitimate boundary that needs to be set, a real issue that needs to be addressed. But even then, addressing it from a place of awareness produces an entirely different quality of communication than addressing it from a place of unconscious reaction. I want to say something important here about the ego's relationship to being triggered, because this is often missed. When you are triggered, the ego experiences this as a threat to its sense of self, and it mobilizes very quickly into either attack or defense, sometimes both simultaneously. It needs to be right. It needs the other person to be wrong. It needs to protect the story it has built about who it is. This is why, in the heat of a triggered reaction, people often say things that are exaggerated, unfair, even cruel, because the ego, in that moment, is not actually interested in truth or resolution. It is interested only in its own survival, its own vindication. This is worth observing honestly in yourself, without shame. We have all done this, and will likely do it again, because this is simply how the unconscious ego operates when it has not yet been illuminated by awareness. But here is the good news, and it is significant. The ego cannot survive full awareness. The moment you become genuinely aware that you are triggered, the moment you can say to yourself, honestly, I am reacting right now, and there is an old pain being activated, you have already, in that very act of noticing, stepped partially outside the complete identification that reaction requires. This does not mean the feeling disappears instantly. It may still be strong, but you are no longer entirely lost inside it. There is a witnessing presence now sharing the space with the reaction, and this presence has a stabilizing, softening effect, even if the change is subtle at first. Let me also speak about what happens after a trigger has passed, because this is equally important. Often, people feel embarrassed or ashamed after realizing they reacted rather than responded, after seeing, in hindsight, that they said something harsh or overreacted to something small or let an old pattern run the show. I want to offer you a different relationship to this. Rather than adding a layer of self-judgment on top of the reaction, which is simply the ego attacking itself now, a subtler form of the same unconsciousness, see if you can meet the reaction after the fact with simple honesty and compassion. I reacted from an old pain just now. I see that clearly now. I did not have full presence in that moment. This honest acknowledgement, free of harsh self-criticism, is itself an act of great awareness, and it often does more to heal the underlying pattern than years of trying to force yourself never to react again through sheer willpower. I also want to address something practical, the role of the body in all of this, because responding instead of reacting is not merely a mental process, it is deeply physiological. When the pain body is triggered, the nervous system moves into a state of activation, heart rate increases, breathing becomes shallow, muscles tense, and the body prepares in a very old and primal way for fight or flight. This physiological state makes wise, measured response extremely difficult because blood flow and attention shift away from the more reflective, considered functions of the mind and toward rapid, instinctive reaction. This is why the simple practice of conscious breathing, even a few slow, deep breaths, can be so powerful. In the middle of a trigger. It directly influences the nervous system, signaling safety to the body, and this in turn makes space for a different quality of response to become available. Now, some people ask me, does this mean I should never express anger, never set firm boundaries, never say difficult things to another person? Not at all. Responding with presence does not mean becoming passive or suppressing your needs or pretending everything is fine when it is not. In fact, responses that come from presence are often more direct, more honest, and more effective than reactions that come from the pain body, because they are not clouded by the need to win, to punish, or to defend an old wound. A boundary set from presence sounds different from a boundary set from reactive anger. It is clear, it is firm, but it does not carry the same charge of aggression or the same residue of old pain. People often sense this difference intuitively, even if they cannot articulate it. A response from presence tends to de-escalate a situation, even when it is firm, while a reaction from the pain body tends to escalate it, even when the words themselves are similar. Over time, as you practice this, noticing the trigger, pausing, feeling the body, asking honestly what is happening within, something begins to shift, not through force, but through the simple accumulation of moments of presence. The pain body, unfed by repeated conflict and drama, gradually loses some of its charge. This does not mean you become emotionless or that difficult situations no longer arise. It means that when they do arise, you increasingly find yourself with a genuine choice, a gap between stimulus and response, where before there was only automatic, unconscious reaction. And in that gap, you discover something valuable: freedom. The freedom to meet each moment as it actually is, rather than through the distorted lens of old pain, looking for confirmation of its old story. So the next time you feel triggered, and it will happen, because this is part of being human, and even the most awakened among us continue to encounter this, see if you can catch it early. Feel the first stirring in the body. Pause, even for one breath. Ask honestly what is happening within you, without judgment. And from that small space of awareness, however brief, choose your response. rather than allowing an old unconscious pattern to choose it for you. This ultimately is the essence of what it means to live consciously, not the absence of difficult emotion, not a permanent state of unshakable calm, but the presence of awareness alongside whatever arises, moment to moment, so that you are no longer simply a puppet of old conditioning, but a conscious participant in your own life, capable, again and again, of choosing presence over pattern, response over reaction, freedom over the old, familiar chains of the unexamined past.